still a lot of people only regard milk protein as the only benefit, and therefore, and also treat protected amino acids as feed additives and not as an essential ingredient to use to formulate with. That's all it really is. It gives you that additional tool to reach the levels of methionine the cow needs.
Welcome back to the Dairy Podcast Show. My name is Barry Bradford. Today, I'm happy to welcome Dr. Brian Sloan to the show. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Always good to talk to you, Barry.
So Brian works for a company called Adisseo. And what is your title, Brian?
So I'm the global director of our dairy amino acid business.
Okay. And I know, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that Adisseo's headquarters in North America is in Georgia, but I'm guessing from your accent, that's not your home region.
No, I am actually, I always try to hide my accent. A little bit of joke, if people could understand me, that's great. But I was born in Scotland, as you said, now based in Atlanta, Georgia. That's where I'm talking from today. But started my career with Adisseo 35 years ago in France. So my first job was not to do research, but it was to learn to speak French. Spent 9 years there, and then I moved to Canada 20 years ago or 25 years ago, and then ended up in Atlanta, Georgia.
It is pretty amazing. You don't often meet people in the corporate world today that have been with a company for 35 years, especially in a technical role. So that's pretty neat.
I mean, I would think I'm. I don't know what you would call it, the rhinoceros or but I'm the exception nowadays. Anyway, not so much for my generation,
right?
Certainly with respect to the younger generation. But I was fortunate because I was able to start off as a researcher and be given opportunities to move through the company to actually have a purely business role today. But as we'll talk, amino acid business there's still a lot of nutrition and technical stuff behind that. So I get to dabble a little bit in the technical stuff still.
Sure. So you grew up in Scotland. Did you grow up on a farm there?
Yeah, my dad milked cows, and so for someone else. So I wasn't, my first idea as a young man or a young kid was to get off the farm and get educated and get out of there, sort of thing. But the calling of the cows drew me back. And so when I went to university, I started off doing biological sciences, but then realized that I wanted to do something much more to do with agriculture. So I switched and did an agricultural biochemistry first degree, and then followed up with some dairy cow trials for my PhD at Newcastle, and finished up in 19. I know I'm not saying that because it's too long ago. People won't relate to that.
19 is the wrong starting numbers, right?
Oh, Barry, that's cruel. That's cruel.
Adisseo, a global leader in nutritional solutions and the provider of Smart Amine M, the best in-class rumen-protected methionine product for dairy producers who want to optimize milk production, capture more value from their components, and maintain the lifetime performance of their herds. For more product information and to calculate your return on investment when you balance your feed with amino acids, go to milkpay.com.
So you started with Adisseo a long, 35 years ago. And I'm thinking back to the development of the technology for rumen bypass amino acids. Was that really just being developed at that time?
Correct. In fact, my only other job was with Eastman Kodak for 3 years prior. And they very much from the U.S. point of view were the really the ones leading the charge at that time in terms of developing the technologies. As I'm sure the audience knows that you can't just feed straight amino acids to dairy cows. You have to fool the cow to letting that methionine or other amino acids get past the rumen so that it can be absorbed by the dairy cow and be of use. Otherwise, the bugs in the rumen get all the profit and the cow gets very little, sort of thing. But Eastman Kodak was at that time, I was with them between when was that? Yeah, between 85 and 88.
Okay.
And they then decided for strategic reasons not to continue in the nutrition space from a business point of view. Mm-hmm. And so Ron Poulenc, which is the forerunner of Adisseo, was also in the European working on basically the same types of approaches. And so Ron Poulenc recovered or bought the patents that held by Eastman Kodak and married them with their own patents to ultimately have what's still perhaps regarded as the first serious amino acid product on the market, SmartAmine M, which is basically a technology where it takes the best of what I call what both companies had at that time.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And just to make sure we don't leave anybody behind here, so we care about amino acids like methionine and lysine because why? What do they do for the cow?
Right. So it's evolved a little over time, but back when, why was the pioneers, what did they see as being the reasons to develop methionine in particular? Methionine, in terms of whatever species you're working with, whether it's chickens or swine or now dairy cows, is always been found to be, if not the first limiting amino acid, certainly one of the first two. It's very, very limiting in chickens, basically because chickens don't just need methionine as a building block for protein synthesis, but it's also essential for feathering. So that's an additional requirement. So that's why methionine is so limiting in chickens. Not so much in swine, though it is the second or third, depending on the rations being fed. Lysine tends to be the first limiting amino acid in swine diets. And in dairy cows, at least I'll just talk, there is exceptions, but in a typical Midwest type ration in the US, we find that methionine is the first limiting amino acids with a typical high corn silage, soybean diet, etc., etc. We can go into that in a little bit of detail if you want later, but basically that's, and so what do you get back? So the first thing was milk protein. So what do you get back? So if you rectify these deficiencies, milk protein tends to be the first thing you see. I'll not say it's the only benefit, but it's certainly the thing that's easy to see when you improve your methionine status of your dairy rations.
Okay. So I'm kind of curious. You made a good point that it's just kind of easier in monogastric species like chicken and swine, right? So what have they learned over decades of playing with purified amino acids, supplementation? Are there tricks that we've brought over into dairy nutrition?
Well, I think there's tricks that we're still maybe way behind on that we will need to apply now, I'm going to say, because of sustainability concerns, because in chicken and swine nutrition, the big thing that happened was reducing dramatically the amount of nitrogen that was being fed in rations. Because I have more swine type values in my head than chicken, but 30 years ago, it wasn't atypical for a growing diet in swine to be 17 or 18% crude protein, whereas today I think it's maybe in the order of 12 to 13, maybe even lower, because they ration to grams of 5 or 6 essential amino acids, and therefore they don't waste any nitrogen when they're doing that as they did in the past. We have only started playing, I would say, in terms of the reduction, perhaps in protein and crude protein in the rations that we work with in dairy. Traditionally, perhaps not by design, but perhaps just by effect, we've always overfed protein to get our amino acids. It's been the way it's done. So 17, 18, even 19% crude protein is still not atypical, particularly on some high alfalfa type rations where you tend to waste a lot of the soluble nitrogen when alfalfa is a major part of the rations. But I foresee that the good people are getting below 16 or around 16 now. But with sustainability and environmental concerns, I mean, that's one thing I see that dropping to 15 and having to drop even further. And so it behoves us to get our amino acid balancing right. And one thing I will say, that has to go beyond lysine and methionine and start to formulate also for some of the other amino acids we talk about, but we have at this point in time no protected solutions like histidine, leucine, isoleucine, etc.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it may be worthwhile to point out that the typical dairy cow on a farm today probably only puts about a fourth of her nitrogen in her diet into the milk, right? So we can't make it 90%, but there is room for improvement.
No, but we can get to theoretical maximum, or some people's theoretical maximum, let's put it that way, is around about 40. You should be able to have an efficiency of around about 40% of dietary protein into what we call edible protein. That's a good target. Some people are certainly the good people are in the 30s already. But, as you said, the national average, well, it's not even the international average is 25%, that's what it is.
Yeah. Okay. So I'd be curious I'm aware of dozens and dozens of studies you guys have been involved with, just the general field of feeding bypass amino acids in dairy cows. And I know you said that you don't get to spend a whole lot of time doing technical talks anymore, but you certainly know the field as well as anybody. What are the key points that, when you talk with people who are not involved in feeding bypass amino acids in their herds, what do you start with, I guess?
Well, now I start with, it's not just milk protein. Because, we sold that so well to begin with, it came back to haunt us. And so people still a lot of people only regard milk protein as the only benefit, and therefore, and also treat protected amino acids as feed additives and not as an essential ingredient to use to formulate with. That's all it really is. It gives you that additional tool to reach the levels of methionine the cow needs. So these are still things we are trying to overcome, I think, in the market to convince people that no, you should be have target methionine levels and lysine levels in your ration. It's not a question of how well is milk protein being paid, whether you use it or don't use it. Because when you do that, I'll be a little bit direct, but I feel you're chronically underfeeding methionine if you simply use methionine when milk protein prices are good. The other thing is that, in fact, and we've realized, and that's been more recently, as you said, we've done a lot of trials, but often in trials we saw milk fat sometimes bouncing around and being quite, but statistically in many trials, milk fat is not significantly different. But when you put the body of data together, in fact, the average milk fat increase to amino acid balancing, mainly to the trials with methionine, is as big, if not bigger, than the response on milk protein percent. And I think that's a little bit difficult for people to actually still accept in some ways, or even though the data's there now, but we need to probably, again, on the to-do list, I think we need to do a serious meta-analysis to put that one to bed and just show that is really the case, rather than just have a 25 trials with arithmetic means, etc. Tells a story, but I think it's important that we scientifically put that one to bed. Okay.
Yep. So, you work with people putting diets together probably all over the world. Are there scenarios, help people understand like what kind of scenarios are going to be the most dramatically methionine deficient, for example? Where do you see this having the biggest impact? Or is there a certain breed or stage of lactation where you see the biggest impact?
Well, I think I'll maybe say there's two questions there. One is dietary, and I think in terms of the where's the biggest relative methionine limitation, where you just basically need to put methionine in there and not change very much else, and you would get an excellent response. But basically, it's changed. But when I started my career, there was a lot of rations wherever you were in the world where, the corn silage was the principal forage in the ration. Corn or barley or wheat were the major cereals, and soybean meal was the major protein. And that type of ration is set up to be methionine deficient. I shouldn't say set up, but just was naturally methionine deficient. And therefore, because I started my career in Europe, so that was the French ration when I started off. That was the ration, and so you could just add a protected methionine in there and get all the response. You did not need to reformulate. But when I moved to the US, it got more complicated very quickly because of the much varied sources of ingredients available. Not so much on the forage side, but certainly soybean meal, yes, it was dominant, but you had lots of other byproducts already 20, 25 years ago. And as soon as you start putting I'm being European, corn byproducts in the ration, you actually lower the levels of lysine, and very quickly you have to start paying attention to the levels of lysine in the ration. Therefore, since I've been in the US, it has all been reformulation basically as our approach, because even though we didn't have, or there wasn't very many certainly good protected lysines on the market until very recently, the only way you could get to the lysine levels required to get the best response to the methionine you were putting in there was by reformulating the ingredients. And the blood meal was a friend, or still is a friend, in that. Obviously blood meal has its challenges as well in terms of quality, etc., but it became very much an ally. And things just get more complicated because soybean meal, for various reasons around the world, is suddenly doesn't have the same I wouldn't say high quality, but because of the considerations, certainly in Europe, where they're saying they don't want to buy Brazilian soya because of their concerns of deforestation. It's being removed, or it's even been banned by some companies to use it in Europe. So canola or rapeseed over there becomes very much a dominant. And so that changes the whole dynamics in terms of how do you formulate around that differently still to achieve your optimum levels of lysine and methionine. So I think your other question was more on the stage of lactation. So
what are there cow factors that have an impact?
Yes. Well, for me, we talk here, and I'll just need to say the word transition, and you can talk for the rest of the podcast, sort of thing. So transition cows, are really the ones who are the most responsive to, I'm going to say amino acid balancing, but in inverted commas, because in fact, I do believe that it's methionine is the dominant factor at this point. We're still seeing how important lysine is in some of the other amino acids, but basically, if you start feeding, maybe our recommendation today is to feed about 5 grams of extra metabolizable methionine pre-calving for at least 3 weeks, and that will set the cow up for success after calving. Well, when I say set up for success, just to simplify things, one thing we find, we set that cow up in terms of our antioxidant status. We really elevate glutathione levels before calving, and that has a great effect after calving and allowing that cow to, because she goes through lots of challenges at the beginning of lactation. So she needs that high antioxidant status going into lactation to be able to fight off whatever challenges that she's likely to face. So, and also part of that, and not quite sure of the exact mechanism, but if cows are challenged intake-wise, again, that pre-calving feeding of extra metabolizable methionine, make sure that the cow's intake also takes off. So we can, some trials, our transition cow trials, we've had up to 10 pounds of extra milk or energy-corrected milk, but part of that is because of the intake effect. It doesn't come from nothing. It's because we've actually stimulated intake at the same time to get these cows off to a great start. And as you know, if you start cows off well, everything else sort of falls into place later if you continue a good nutrition program. And, and that's where we say today that, transition cows should be a no-brainer for the return but you should actually continue amino acid balance, and maybe not to the same levels of methionine. We tend to emphasize to a slightly higher level of methionine, at least as a percent of the energy in the ration in that early phase, and then taper it down a little bit, but to get the best effects. But it should be amino acid balancing should be done all through lactation. So, so I've done all the talking. Your turn now, Barry.
No, this is good. I think another question some people might have, you kind of alluded to the fact that the rumen bacteria can destroy naked amino acids if you just feed cows with that. And you talked about amino acid balancing. Can you give us a little insight into how we have any insight into the amino acids available to the cow? Because maybe you can talk through microbial protein and that sort of thing, and how we predict whether a cow is short or not. Right.
So, just to remind the listener, what is a ruminant, sort of thing. And so, basically because of the cow having 4 stomachs, one of the most important being the rumen, in the sense of that's where, gives the ruminant the ability to consume and digest forages. So what happens in the rumen is, the forages and the other ingredients are confronted by a microbial population, which goes to work and digests all these ingredients. And I'll just focus on the protein side, because obviously the energy side is also very important there, because when you digest forage and other ingredients, your principal energy nutrients that are then supplied to the cow are volatile fatty acids. But these are produced by the microbes. But I think what people maybe don't realize is that, in fact, that of all the protein that's ingested, it also is digested by that microbial population. And by the time the animal sees the amino acids that comes from the diet, actually it's on average seen less than half of the protein that was originally in the diet, but the other half has been transformed into microbial protein. So typically, what the cow will absorb in terms of amino acids is 50-50, and I might not be up to date on that, but it might actually be. It really depends. It can be 60-40 depending on how you feed the cow. So we're talking about amino acids. Therefore, you have to be able to predict what's the profile of the microbial part of that contribution, and also the contribution by, we'll say that the bypass fractions of each of the ingredients that have been in the diet. And so that's kept many of us in business over the years, so I think that's why there's no poultry or swine nutritionists left, and it's all ruminant nutritionists, because it's much more difficult to do the job. And that's why I tell my colleagues in the monogastric, on the monogastric side, sort of thing. But so I think a couple of key points is that actually microbial protein is an excellent source of amino acids. In the general sense, it does have the right amino acid profile that ultimately will satisfy most of the amino acid requirements of the animal. The one amino acid, and that's sort of just tends to be limiting, at least in from my perspective, is histidine in microbial protein. So that's one reason why I would say, and well, not just I would say, I think if you feed a diet that tends to produce a large proportion of the total supply as microbial protein, that could be the type of diet that would be ultimately limiting in histidine, and therefore why histidine could be another interesting amino acid to protect eventually, to make sure that there was no shortfall in supply for the dairy animal. I don't know if that answered all of the questions you are getting at there, Barry, or not.
No, I think it's good to think about the complexity of what we're trying to do here. And so when it's been interesting to watch over the last, especially 25 years, how this message has kind of been put out there in sort of training for nutritionists and stuff. What do you see in the U.S., let's say, for example, do you see 90% of dairy nutritionists doing amino acid balancing at some level? I'm curious what you think the current status of that is.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know the percentage of nutritionists. It's certainly lower than 90, but I'd probably say it's more than 50. I tend to sort of think in terms of how many cows are receiving a diet that are amino acid balanced. It's more the way from a business perspective I tend to think about it.
Yeah.
So I believe in it. And the US is really interesting because it's quite different by region.
Okay.
So I'll try to explain. We talked about some rations that are particularly conducive to being amino acid balanced. It's ones where traditionally it's high forage, high soybean meal, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's, I say it's got more complicated, but traditionally that's your Midwest and Northeast rations. Okay, and so we see a lot of amino acid balancing, maybe even up to 50% of the cows in these regions. The nutritionists who are feeding these cows, applying amino acid balancing on a regular basis. Whereas California might be 5%. There's two reasons there. One is ration and one is milk payments, because California was one of the regions who did not, in the year 2000, go to federal order pricing, where milk protein was paid. So in the Midwest and Northeast, there's been this incentive on the payment side to apply amino acid balancing as well. Whereas that only happened, I'm going to say 5 years ago in California or something like that. And so they're at a much, I don't want to use the word behind, but now they're looking again, but their rations are very, very different, as you know. Low forage, high canola, high everything byproduct, high almond hulls. So I think there's also a belief there, and we need to work on that as well, is to provide them with more information on the ingredients from California. Yeah. The problem has been is that they often tell me, "Oh, Brian, by the time you asked me to do analysis, by the time I do an analysis, I fed that, so it doesn't matter anymore." So there's a whole, let's say, cultural thing that I think we need to get over in California for progress to be made in terms of adopting amino acids. I'm still convinced that amino acid balancing works as well in California as anywhere else. It's just a question of, I think, of the database on ingredients and etc. that needs to be updated and made to work. And maybe development of NIR such that they can take advantage, while they still have that feed to feed, that they actually get a real analysis back. Something like almond hulls, which might be pretty variable, sort of thing. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Like you said, the complexity of predicting what the cow's getting in the existing diet to see if adding more helps when you don't have good data coming into that, right? It adds uncertainty to that. That makes sense.
When your goal is to help animals reach their full potential, health matters. Diamond V offers a fresh perspective on animal health, a perspective that supports gut health, strengthens immunity, and ultimately enhances performance. For those who choose to invest in keeping healthy animals healthy, feeding Diamond V makes a statement about another dimension of profit, where margins are measured by confidence in your future. To get a fresh perspective, visit diamondv.com, because animal health deserves a healthier approach.
So without asking you to spill, a lot of company secrets, what are you thinking about for the, next 5 years in terms of what are you excited about in this field of science, I guess?
Well, I think, and a little plug, that we just had a series of what we called our 30th anniversary year was in 2023. And so that was because we felt, you always like an excuse to have a party, right? Sort of thing. But so the 30 years was from there was a publication in France by a guy called Dr. Henri Roca. Basically, he was the first to publish a practical amino acid balance system. And so we wanted to celebrate that. Obviously, culturally, we feel very French,
Sure.
Sort of thing, so that was one thing. But not just because of that, but actually it was an excellent first paper, and really, I think after that, amino acid balancing took off in a practical sense. And many of the things that he published in that first system were put in NRC 2000, and also subsequently, I think, inspired some of the things in the Cornell model as well. Though the Cornell model is a little different, but bits and pieces of what was published back then, I think, inspired the direction of CNCPS, sort of thing. But I think the principal thing we used at 30th anniversary, I'd say road shows were, because we did 5 different large-scale seminars worldwide, was to really roll out what I call the new science and all this, which we haven't had a chance to talk about. Really, we touched on it within transition, but over and above that was to really look at the other roles of methionine in terms of from a functional amino acid, and basically, without going into the details of the science part, what that means is that methionine, will plays other roles, and not just as a building block for proteins in the body, but facilitates other metabolic functions, etc. And ultimately, why is that of importance for the dairy cow? Is that that will help in transition. We talked a little bit about that, but you will see much less metabolic problems post-calving when you have a diet reinforced in terms of methionine. And subsequently, it also plays a very important role indirectly and directly on reproduction. So just one anecdote is, for example, we have shown quite clearly that when cows are fed sufficient methionine, you reduce embryonic death, for example, would be one aspect of reproduction that's been well documented now. So we've took that opportunity last year to roll that out. Now, really, it's going forward is to reinforce all that and help our customers, etc., to exploit that and put it into their programs in terms of how to employ that. One big thing we hope, but the whole industry has been hoping for 3 or 4 years, is that the next version of the Cornell model will come out, because certainly most nutritionists in the US use the Cornell model, and it's the new model will, I think, also give us this opportunity to leap forward in terms of amino acid balancing. No longer will we only talk about lysine and methionine. We will talk about some of the other ones. There will be, not quite sure exactly how they'll express them now, but they promise that they'll give gram recommendations for at least 3 or 4 of the other amino acids for people to target and see if they get the benefits to use that. So certainly in the next 2 or 3 years, I think a lot of us who are in this area will be focusing on translating whatever the new Cornell model is into practical formulation guidelines and helping our customers get on board and profit from what we tend to call precision nutrition, because basically that's where we want to go. Again, going back to the sustainability concerns, we no longer can afford to waste anything. We have to efficiently use all the nutrients that we are supplying to our dairy cow.
Makes sense. Yeah, I can imagine that rolls out. There'll be lots of consulting nutritionists playing with diets all night, the first few nights. Where can, like you said, where can we make a difference for customers? It's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, to change topics a little bit here, you live in a pretty big city compared to a lot of people that probably listen to this. One question we like to throw at people, on your commute home, if you could pay for a billboard for a couple weeks and educate people on one thing about the dairy industry, what would you put up there?
Wow. I think the one is, because as you know, milk for a while had a bad name. I would say it's actually, even without putting up a new billboard, in terms of the milk has no longer a bad name per se in terms of fat. The fat, I think, in general is recognized as good now, and that's why we've seen a rebound in terms of certainly the drinking of whole whole fat milk. Unfortunately, the overall trend is to consume less milk. In fact, it's the low-fat milks that are the ones that are being consumed less and less because they are just being, moved aside by the pseudo milks, and also, we like to pick on them. But of course, it's also Coke, Diet Coke, Dr. Pepper, whatever. In the US, you have so many. So what would I put in my billboard? Well, if I try not to be business oriented and more consumer oriented, I think it's more on the sustainability issue to emphasize that the cows are friends of the environment, and therefore we're all making our efforts, but don't throw cows under the bus. We all need to make efforts, but in fact, we cannot survive without ruminants or cows. Sort of thing. So. We
I'm
have
a big fan of that.
Communicate that effectively, and when I say effectively, I think our biggest challenge as an industry is that we sometimes perhaps don't communicate in the right way. Mm-hmm. I think you have to meet in the middle, or be seen to at least meeting in the middle, because if you say, "Oh, we're not the problem," and cow, etc., we have to be able to put our message over in a manner acceptable to the consumer. We may not think that we need to do that, but we have to. That's what communication is all about. You have to you have to use the right way to market to be able to convince your eventual consumer of the message you want to put over.
Yeah, if they don't think you have shared values with them, why would they listen to you? Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
for sure.
We have kids as well, right? We have kids as well. We have the same concerns. We want the planet to survive as well as anybody else. So.
Absolutely.
It's time for our famous 3. Natural Biologics is using cutting-edge science to deliver cost-effective solutions for the animal health and productivity challenges you face. For conventional or organic production systems, Natural Biologics can help support rumen health and immune function, mitigate pathogens, and increase production efficiency. Visit naturalbiologics.com to learn more.
Well, we've come to that dreaded time where we ask the 3 most difficult questions of all of our guests. All right, so first of all, what's your favorite dairy-related book or resource?
So, it's easy to say that, the NRC 2000, and so because at that time, indirectly, I was very much involved. It seems a little selfish, but, saying that's my resource because, we were very much involved with Dr. Charles Schwab, to write the protein chapter. We at the time, we felt it was so important that, he had to find a grad student to help him to put that chapter together. So we were more than happy to support him in that. And so I got an inside track a little bit on that chapter. And so I still go back to that today. Obviously with my functions changing, I didn't get so involved in the NASEM or even the output from the NASEM, but then actually 2001, I still think on the protein side, still it's hard to beat. It's hard to beat in terms of starting from the amino acid point of view. But again, as we talked before, you cannot just isolate the amino acid part per se. And that I think they did a good job in 2001 to pull all that together. Certainly, it was a big evolution from the 1989. NASEM is different. And I think we're all still trying to get our heads around that a little bit in terms of how to practically use it. Let's put it that way. Science is amazing in NASEM, but it's more how do you actually then put your hands around it and use it in practice?
It is still complex.
A challenge, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
And just if anybody's not tracking this, these are the evolutions of the nutrient requirements of dairy cattle put out by the national academies in the U.S. Mm-hmm. Okay. What about your favorite resource or book outside of ag?
So I warned you, but maybe you didn't read my email, that I do very little reading at all. It might seem strange for someone in my position. I tend to rely on, even though on my information on the web, etc.
Sure.
So I thought the only thing I wait on, Barry, is that I wait for every publication that you do. So that
You're good. I see why you got into business. Yeah.
yeah. But I'm a sports fanatic. I read lots and lots about sport, and so
Okay.
so I am. That's my I don't know if it's a virtue or not, but that's anything. When I shut off from my work, it's all sport. But anything to do with sport, it's not reading, deep fiction or etc. So
sure. So I'm curious, is that more like rugby, soccer type stuff, or it just everything?
The real football, so soccer, right?
Real football, okay, yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I played as a young man. I played university level in Scotland, which
Oh wow.
But that was in front of one person, whereas in the US you play in front of 100,000, right? So that thing.
That's pretty neat.
So I just thought I was born in the wrong place and too long ago. So I always dream. I always dream. Brian, you just were born too early. My anecdote was that if I could have been a professional soccer player, I wouldn't have needed to be a nutritionist, but I had to find a real job like most people, So.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, you're probably doing more to make the world a better place as a nutritionist.
Very good.
I shouldn't judge, I guess. All right. So last point, last question. In your opinion, what sets successful dairy professionals apart from those who are less successful?
So I think it's certainly success is a thing built over time. Someone can be apparently successful for 1 or 2 years because, what I call a flash in the pan, but people who have been there, and I'm thinking more of a practicing nutritionist. I think fundamentally they care about their clients and they care about the clients' cows, sort of thing. And ultimately they are trying to do everything to make sure that both are treated correctly. I may have a false impression of some dairy producers, but sometimes I think they're very difficult to work with, dairy producers, because they've evolved a lot over the last 40 years. So many of them now are just pure businessmen, and therefore they forgot the cow element at times, sort of thing. And so I think a good dairy professional, a dairy nutritionist, has to do more than what he did at one time, which was simply show up, do a good ration, and come back in a month. He has to be a good dairy professional today as a people's person. He has to take on board a lot of the other challenges on the dairy that's expected of him. And so I know some who say, I don't get to spend as much time as I want on the actual nutrition any longer because I'm dealing with the whole dairy challenges rather than just the nutritional challenges. So for me, a good nutritional professional is somebody who is able to encompass all that, do a good job, and be appreciated. And obviously, there is quite a few out there you see, wow, these guys never lose customers. They have the same loyal customers all the time. So I think, again, that's as we talk about in business, that's your KPI or key performance indicator is you have a high retention of your clientele.
Well, Brian, it's been a fun conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on the Dairy Podcast Show.
Well, my pleasure, and anytime, okay? Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. That wraps up another episode of the Dairy Podcast Show. Don't forget to join us next time, and we'll see you then.